Okay, so we're going to look at development. I'm going to go through puppies developing and look at it from both a physical but also an emotional point of view. So we know that obviously they're altricial. So when they come out, they're actually pretty helpless. They don't have visual or auditory input. But we need to be careful that we don't then just say they're not in touch with their environment, because eyes and ears are only part of the sensory input that happens. Okay, because of our dependency on those senses for our communication, we tend to think that if you're not able to see or hear, that somehow you're disconnected from the environment, and that's not true. There are other senses. They're not very well developed in humans unless people develop them because of limitations in these two senses, and then people can actually develop pretty effective use of other sensory systems. But we're quite a lazy species, and if these two work well, we don't really develop the others particularly, and we don't really use them very much. So at this point, there is a reliance, there's a social obligation for this puppy to be in the presence of something that will care for it. And usually that is going to be mum, but obviously we're all very familiar with the fact that sometimes mums died during the process of giving birth, or died in the process of a section or something. So it's not necessarily always mum, but obviously in its natural format that would be the most likely source of that caring behaviour. So her care response leads her to get those membranes off, to clean that puppy up, to stimulate it to start breathing. That's all care-driven behaviour, trying to improve the chances of this individual puppy surviving, and then doing that for each of the puppies as they're born. And then, of course, she goes on to nursing. And from the puppy's perspective, this is the desire-seeking system. This system is triggered the very moment that they are first born, when that you see them doing that rooting reflex. Obviously, there is a neurological basis to how that behaviour happens, the reflex, but there is an emotional drive as well involved in that. Okay, so the desire seeking, I'm just talking about the emotional development. So yes, they will have an instinct, if you like, although Don Broom talks about there being no instincts and no innate behaviours. There are behaviours from his point of view that are there and ready to be programmed, but must be influenced by the environment, and therefore you can't actually call them innate. Now that's a bit of a esoterical argument, and which we could talk about, but I've used the word instinctively there. So remember that some of the puppies are going to be slow. Some of them may need some kind of guiding, and that may happen by mum. You see her nosing them up their backsides and kind of helping them along. You'll also see them being near to another puppy and wriggling along alongside another puppy. So there is individual variation even at this stage in their emotional drive. And as long as they're not actually distressed, it's really better not to intervene at that point, to allow for individual variation. They are not all going to get to the nipple at exactly the same point in time, and as long as they're not distressed, then it's best to let that happen. So they should nurse every 2 hours or so directly after birth, and again that's a combination of desire seeking from them and care system from her, and that is working together for their survival. And then, as we know, yes, they're born altricial, but they're very, very quick in their development. Both their physical development, but also their emotional development is much more rapid than ours. And so by a few weeks of age, they are actually capable of being rehomed. They can go and live independently of that maternal care. However, they're a socially obligate animal, so they still need caring for. So what we do with domestic dogs is we put people in loco parentis, and we get them to carry on the nurturing and the care behaviour to allow them to come away from their actual dam. Does that make sense? Obviously, if they were not domestic puppies, they don't walk away from their mums at 8 weeks of age. That caring does take a bit longer than that. So they're physically capable, but emotionally, we need to remember that they still have a very strong desire-seeking system drive to be cared for, and equally the potential for a panic grief response if that nurturing is not available to